Welcome. I'm Hart Hagen, and we're going to talk about the catastrophic wildfire narrative, especially false solutions to wildfire. The way this came about is that a New York Times article popped up in my feed, and I read it, and it was the usual fare of timber industry propaganda. The thing about it is that the timber industry is powerful with propaganda. And therefore everything is an excuse for logging, including wildfires. They try to take wildfires and say we need to thin these forests. We need to thin them and burn them to reduce the fuel. But that turns out to leave a lot to be desired. But for the time being, what they've done is they've captured the media, they've captured government institutions, they've captured NGOs, and they've captured the hearts and minds of the public, largely through a fear-based narrative that has nothing to do with the realities of wildfires. Wildfire is good for our forests. We don't need to protect our forests from wildfire. We need to protect people, property, and communities from wildfire, but the wildfire helps the forest itself regenerate. So we need to balance those two things. It seems strange to say, but for one thing, you can't suppress all wildfires. You might be able to suppress 97% of them, but it's that other 3% that are the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, and they simply can't be stopped. Meanwhile, and if they rip through a community, the problem is we did not protect that community. There are ways of protecting our communities that are much better and quite a bit different from these approaches of we're going to fight wildfires wherever they occur. So let's get into this. I'm going to share my screen with you. There we go. So I'm showing you my handy dandy slideshow, the catastrophic wildfire narrative. Put my mic there and see if that works a little better. So I would remind you and invite you to go to harthagen.substack.com for I've written like 4 articles in the last 2 weeks. So go on this topic, on the topic of wildfires, on the topic of misinformation that is used to exploit our forests, and they are our forests, especially the public forests. So go to harthagen.substack.com for some good recent articles. And also when you subscribe to harthagen.substack.com, you get a continual notifications of my most recent webinars. Also go to harthagen.net for notifications of my most recent webinar, webinars that are upcoming soon. Also, go to check out Wildlife and Climate, which is a course coming up October 9th. I am the instructor. We have a great lineup of speakers, including Alejandro Carrillo, Jonathan Lundgren. And if you don't know Alejandro Carrillo or Jonathan Lundgren or Joel Berger or Layla Phillip, then go to Biodiversity for a Livable Climate and search for that course. Wildfire smoke will kill thousands more by 2050. So this is what popped up in my New York Times feed, and the subtitle, the subheadline is "Pollution from Fires Intensified by Rising Temperatures is on track to become one of America's deadliest climate disasters." This is sensationalistic. It is a fear-based narrative. It is designed to motivate you and me to support policies that are actually bad for the public, bad for our forests, etc. This New York Times article is covering the report in the scientific journal Nature titled "Wildfire Smoke Exposure and Mortality Burden in the U.S. Under Climate Change." So what they did here is they're doing statistical modeling to try to determine how much human health diseases, how much human health, the diseases and the mortality as a result from wildfire. And they're using assumptions, and I really don't, I don't fault their basic, there's fact finding and then there's interpretation. I fault their interpretation of the data. I don't fault their findings of fact. They have a hard job to do, but they are falsely, in some cases, falsely attributing wildfires to climate change. But we'll get in. But more importantly, let me just get into it. I'm trying to summarize when it's hard. Now, this is the article that I wrote. Prestigious media outlets and scientific sources continue to employ the catastrophic wildfire narrative to propose industry-friendly faux solutions. Let's look at this article. Wildfire smoke will kill thousands more by 2050, study finds. And this emblem on the left here is just a representation of the article that I wrote. And I invite you to go to harthagen.substack.com to read that article. The subtitle of the article in New York Times is "Pollution from Fires Intensified by Rising Temperatures is on track to become one of America's deadliest climate disasters." This is me talking here. The catastrophic wildfire narrative refers to sensationalistic reporting that calls for stopping all wildfires everywhere and ignoring the beneficial effects of wildfire on forest health. The New York Times is talking about a report from the scientific journal Nature. The study modeled statistical data that attributes disease to smoke from wildfires and in turn attributes wildfires to climate change, all of which is legitimate, really. This is difficult even with the best data and the most powerful data analysis tools, including AI. But these reports are problematic not because of the innate complexity of the problem, but because of fundamental errors in their understanding of wildfires. The issues to be addressed in this talk and in the article that I wrote, the issues to be addressed: to what extent does climate change cause wildfires? Insofar as climate change causes wildfires, are the proposed solutions actually solutions or just profitable distractions? Number two, what is the catastrophic wildfire narrative? Are we being told the truth about when wildfires are problematic and what to do about it? Number three, does forest thinning suppress wildfires? Is forest thinning good for the forest? Are wildfires good for the forest? If so, then how do we balance the needs of the forest with the safety of people? Issues to be addressed continued. Number 5, 6, and 7. Do prescribed burns and logging-related burning of slash piles reduce the total amount of smoke to which people are exposed? Number 6, if we are concerned with the health effects of smoke, then why do we needlessly expose firefighters and communities to smoke? Number 7, have the New York Times or Nature been unduly influenced by the timber industry? I will argue that although climate change is connected to wildfires, the connection is misunderstood and some solutions only worsen the problem. Number 2, that forest thinning is another word for logging and that it only exacerbates wildfires. Number 3, that if we are really concerned about the health impacts of smoke from outdoor fires, we would reduce the prevalence of thinning, logging, and prescribed burns, which only benefit logging companies, not people or forests. And these activities generate more smoke. So which generates more smoke? The wildfires or the man-made activities designed that supposedly suppress wildfires, but really don't. Number 4, I will argue that insofar as we want to protect people from the effects of fire, and smoke, we will work to directly protect homes and communities and not engage in heroic, though futile, attempts to suppress wildfires in the wildlands. The way to protect people and communities is to directly make homes more fireproof, the home itself and the surrounding area, plus other buildings, of course. Number 5, I will argue that the New York Times and Nature are not exhibiting an acceptable degree of independence from the timber industry or the biomass energy industry who benefit from false solutions to wildfire. Media, government, NGOs are captured by not only the timber industry, but also the biomass energy industry, which wants to just chew up those parts of our forests that are not suitable for timber, but are suitable for burning in the biomass energy industry, which is dirtier than coal. It generates more carbon emissions than coal, but it's profitable as long as it's heavily subsidized by taxpayers. So I'm quoting the article here. It says strategies such as forest thinning might lessen the intensity of future blazes. They're proposing a solution. The solution they propose is forest thinning. The translation is logging is the solution. Forest thinning in practice, in theory, forest thinning is not logging. In practice, forest thinning is logging. Here I'm talking about a study done by certain Bradley, Chad Hansen, and Dominic Della Sala. Does increased forest protection correspond to higher severity in frequent fire forests of the United States, of the Western United States? Forest protection means we're going to protect the forest from activities such as thinning, burning, logging, and spraying. That we're going to leave it alone, and this is in our national forests, not to be confused with our national parks. So they concluded that when we protect forests, then they burn at lower levels of severity or lower levels of intensity, as opposed to the prevailing narrative where they want you to believe that because our forests have been allowed to grow, then they're just kind of a torch waiting to happen. They're a massive out of control wildfire waiting to happen, which is not true, but it's a narrative. It's the catastrophic wildfire narrative, which has gained hold and become successful. So the takeaway from this study by Bradley, Della Sala, and Hansen is that for the forest protection, when you protect the forest from thinning, then this reduces the severity of wildfires. Why? Because the forest has more moisture in it, because of shade, and because it's a windbreak, because sun and wind are going to dry out the forest. If you allow the forest to become more dense, then it's going to protect the forest from the sunlight, which would tend to dry things out, and also from the wind, which tends to dry things out. This slide talks about slash debris. Logging creates slash debris, defined as smaller parts of the tree that are left over after the logs are removed. Why is this a problem? So the idea here is that they propose thinning as a way of reducing the intensity and severity of wildfires, but the thinning, in theory, it's not logging. In practice, thinning is logging. So, and logging results in slash debris. Slash debris itself is it's fuel. It lies around, and it is fuel for fires. Slash debris is flammable. Instead of letting it lie around, logging companies are required to burn it. This generates smoke. Smoke is allegedly a concern here. Isn't it ironic that a proposed solution to smoke is to generate more smoke? And I would like to see a study, maybe these studies have been done, maybe, but I would like to see a study that says how much smoke is generated from prescribed burns and from burning of slash debris, and how does that compare to the smoke that emanates from wildfires. And if it's comparable or more, then that seems to defeat the purpose insofar as we are concerned about the health impacts of smoke from wildfires. Now, here is the false narrative. The idea on this slide is that we've been treated to a false narrative. So I'm going to tell you what the false narrative is, and then I'm going to tell you about the false claims inherent in the false narrative, and go from there. So the false narrative is that in the Smokey Bear era, so some of us grew up when the Smokey Bear campaign was a big thing, starting in the 60s, but certainly in the 70s, Smokey Bear was at its height as an ad campaign. In the Smokey Bear era, all fire was thought to be bad. Only you can prevent forest fires. Now we know that some fire is good, so the narrative goes. But high intensity fire is bad, we are told. So they're making a distinction between high intensity fire and low intensity fire. High intensity fire is bad, low intensity fire is good, or can be good, so the story goes. And number 4, in the Smokey Bear era, we were so successful at fire suppression that our forests are now overgrown with fuel. And so that what they don't say is that fuel, it makes all the difference in the world whether the fuel is wet or dry. So let's not call it fuel if it's wet, because if it's wet, it's not going to burn. But this mistake is not even it's either a mistake or a lie, one or the other. This mistake is made all the time, or the lie is told all the time, that more organic matter, more biomass, more plant matter, more wood in a forest is fuel, but it's just not true. Number 5, our forests are now too dense. They're too dense with wood and leaves and stuff. Number 6, dense forests burn hotter. We're told that dense forests burn hotter, but that study I showed you by Hansen, De La Sala, and somebody else, who was that? Bradley, Hansen, and De La Sala shows that dense forests are protected forests, and forests that are protected and therefore dense do not burn hotter. Number 7, we are told that we have to thin our forests to remove fuel. But we know that in theory, thinning is not logging, but in practice, thinning is logging. The forest timber industry wants us to think that thinning, that we need to do thinning to remove fuel. Number 8, we also have to conduct this is the false narrative I'm telling you about. We have to conduct prescribed burns to eliminate fuel before it builds up and burns in large catastrophic wildfire. Problem with that is that large catastrophic fires can and do occur in places that were subject to prescribed burns recently. Now, here are the false claims. This slide is all about the false narrative. Now I'm going to tell you about the claims that underlie the false narrative. The catastrophic wildfire narrative indulges in these false claims. Number 1, as forests grow, they acquire additional fuel. Number 2, more fuel means it's more flammable. Number 3, thinning, that is logging, makes forests less flammable, we are told. Number 4, large and intense wildfires do catastrophic damage to the forest and are devastating to the health of the forest. Number 5, thinning and burning are effective common sense measures that reduce wildfire intensity and slow the spread of wildfires, protecting people and property. They want us to believe that thinning, burning are effective common sense measures that reduce the intensity of wildfire, protecting people and property. But it's just not true. Number 6, they want us to believe that we can and must fight wildfires wherever they occur, starting in the wildlands, far from people or property. That's, all of our lives we've been treated to stories on the news about, look at those brave they are brave, but look at those firefighters out there fighting wildfires. And what we are never told is that it is an act of futility to fight wildfires when it's far from people and property. Emotional proof, the idea here that these claims are never proved. So this is all emotional proof. These claims above are never proven, they're only asserted. The weapon is not logic or proof, but emotion and innuendo. Now, responding, what's the response to the false claims? Maybe this is a little redundant, but responding to the false claims, as forests are allowed to grow, they don't become more flammable, they become cooler and more shady, acquiring moisture and retaining moisture, making them less flammable. That's why protecting forests is important, because if you protect the forest from logging, thinning, burning, and spraying, then it becomes less, then it acquires more moisture, retains more moisture, and becomes less flammable. Number 2, forest thinning, i.e. logging, does not make the forest less flammable. It only generates debris called slash, which is more flammable. Number 3, logging dries the forest floor by exposing it to more sunlight and wind. Number 4, large and intense wildfires are not devastating or catastrophic from the standpoint of forest health. This is very important, because in the media coverage and in the government agencies, mainly the Forest Service, they conflate and confuse the protecting the forest from protecting people and property and communities. Those are two different things. We don't need to protect the forest from wildfire, because wildfire tends to have a regenerating effect on the forest, almost without exception. Okay. In fact, these forests that have been burned are hotbeds, no pun intended, of biological diversity, and quickly regenerate if not subjected to post-fire logging. Responding to false claims. Number 5, thinning and burning do not reduce wildfire intensity, and they do not slow the spread of dangerous fire, so they do not protect people or property from the rapid spread of wildfire. In fact, they tend to lull people into a false sense of security, which can kill people, as in the 2018 Camp Fire, which affected the communities of Paradise and Concal, California, where people falsely believed that logging in surrounding areas would protect their community. Instead, 85 people died. That was the deadliest wildfire in California history. Not the most acreage burned, but killed the most people. And number 6, as mentioned in item 5 above, people of Concal and Paradise had falsely believed in the prevailing strategies that call for fighting wildfires wherever they occur, starting in the wildlands. Now, so the conclusion from all this, having made a considerable study of wildfire reporting in the media, I would estimate that 90% of the media reporting related to wildfire is sadly subservient to timber interest and pro-logging narratives. These reports are no exception, notwithstanding the prestige of the institutions involved. The institutions meaning New York Times, very prestigious media institution. Nature is a very prestigious scientific institution. But still, even in these outlets, the reporting on wildfire is 90% subservient to timber industries and pro logging narratives. If you believe everything you read in those sources, including the most prestigious ones, then you'll be strongly motivated. And this is the idea, that you'll be strongly motivated to support public subsidies for the private industries including the biomass energy industry, the logging industry, those industries that pretend to have solutions to problems related to wildfires and climate change. You'll be motivated to increase the already lavish bipartisan, not one party or the other, but the bipartisan subsidies to the logging industry, including logging for biomass energy, which is there's nothing good to be said for logging for biomass energy. These reports rest on dubious foundations and propose measures that are bad for our climate. If you read these reports rest on dubious foundations and propose measures that are bad for our climate, our biosphere, our forests, and human health. So this has been my video summary of, I hope you go to harthagen.substack.com and read this and my other recent articles, including the one entitled Prestigious Media Outlets and Scientific Sources Continue to Employ the Catastrophic Wildfire Narrative to Propose Industry-Friendly Faux Solutions. The scientific and media establishment borrows heavily from the timber industry playbook, proposing false and destructive solutions to wildfire. The references here, I told you about the article from Bradley, Hansen, and Della Sala. Also, Calkin wrote the second item here, wildland urban fire disasters aren't actually a wildfire problem. We are spending lots and lots of technology, lots and lots of money in an essentially failed effort to suppress wildfires wherever they occur, as reported in an opinion piece in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The third item here, I recommend Smokescreen. Here's a copy of Smokescreen from Chad Hansen, extremely good book. And then lastly, George Werthner, it's The Wind, Stupid. It's The Wind, Stupid is about what really causes wildfires to occur. It's not fuel. It's not the buildup of fuel. It's not our forests being too dense. It's because of wind. It's hot, dry winds, especially in the fire season. And yes, a warming climate affects this, but we need to choose our battles and separate good fire. We need to protect people and property instead of trying to suppress all wildfires everywhere, including the most intense one. The ecology of our forest depends on high intensity wildfires. So this has been False Solutions to Wildfire, the Catastrophic Wildfire Narrative. And I invite you to check out the Wildlife and Climate course online via Zoom. Is wildlife simply at the mercy of climate chaos, or could its survival hold the key to restoring balance? Check that out on the website of Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. And for more, go to harthagen.substack.com and also harthagen.net. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day, and come back soon.